The Arizona sun was bleeding its last light across the horizon, turning the sand into waves of molten gold. The air shimmered with heat, heavy and unrelenting, carrying the sharp scent of dust and mesquite. A lone figure stumbled across the barren plain, a young Apache woman, her bare feet raw and bleeding from the cruel rocks. Her name was Kaya, though at that moment she was little more than a shadow running from death. Behind her, 3 riders pushed their horses hard, the thunder of hooves echoing like war drums in the dying light. "Get her, boys!" one of them hollered. His laughter cracked through the air, mean and drunk on power. Kaya's breath came ragged, chest heaving as she darted toward the low ridges ahead. A thin stream glinted between the stones, the only promise of life in a land built to test it. She splashed into the shallow water, the shock of it biting her skin. For one fleeting second, she thought she might vanish into the rocks, disappear into the land like her ancestors had once done. But the horses were closing fast. She heard the scrape of metal, the hiss of a man spitting tobacco, and the sound of boots hitting the ground. "Nowhere to go, sweetheart," a voice sneered. "You should have stayed in your camp." The men fanned out, their shadows long and crooked in the sunset. Kaya's dress hung in torn ribbons. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned steady. Dark and defiant, the eyes of someone who refused to beg. One of the men waded forward, boots sinking in the muddy shallows. "Don't make it harder than it needs to be." And then, the rifle cracked. The shot echoed through the valley, clean and precise, cutting through the laughter like a blade. The man in the water froze, his hat spinning away as a bullet split the rock an inch from his boot. From the ridge above, a voice called out, calm but heavy as thunder, "You're on my land." The men turned, squinting toward the sound. There he stood, tall, broad-shouldered, the sun sinking behind him in a blaze of orange. His hat was old and gray, his coat faded from years of sun and wind. A Winchester rifle rested steady in his hands. Wesley Reed, the rancher from Dust Creek. Folks around those parts said he kept to himself, spoke to no one, and preferred the company of horses to people. "Who the hell are you?" Rattler Morgan, the biggest of the 3, barked, spitting in the dirt. Wesley didn't answer right away. He just lowered his rifle a fraction and said, slow and steady, "Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is where you're standing." Rattler's hand twitched toward his holster, but the rifle's barrel tilted up again, just enough to make him think twice. The other 2 shuffled back, glancing at one another, unsure. Kaya stood motionless in the stream, watching the man on the ridge. He wasn't dressed like a lawman, no badge, no uniform, just a dust-beaten rancher, but something in his stance made even the wind hold its breath. "Take your horses," Wesley said, voice gravelly but clear, "and get off my property before I start aiming lower." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Rattler spat again, muttered a curse, and swung himself back into the saddle. "Come on," he growled to his men. "Ain't worth it." The 3 riders turned and disappeared into the desert haze, leaving only the fading sound of hooves and the whisper of wind through the mesquite. Wesley slung the rifle over his shoulder and started down the slope. Each step was deliberate, his boots crunching over gravel. Up close, Kaya saw the lines on his face. Sunburnt skin, a few days of stubble, eyes the color of weathered wood. He stopped a few feet from the stream, keeping a respectful distance. "You hurt bad?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She didn't answer. Her gaze flicked between his face and the gun still hanging from his shoulder. "I'm not with them," he said, nodding toward the horizon. "Name's Reed. Wesley Reed. This land's mine." Her breathing slowed, but her shoulders stayed tense. "They stole my necklace," she said finally, her English careful, accented but steady, "and tore my dress." Wesley studied her a moment, then shrugged off his old canvas coat and held it out, not moving closer. "Can't help with the necklace," he said softly, "but this'll cover you up fine." Kaya hesitated, eyes wary. Then after a long pause, she stepped forward and took it. She turned her back as she slipped it on, pulling the heavy fabric over her torn clothes. It nearly swallowed her, but when she turned back around, some small measure of dignity had returned. "Thank you," she said stiffly, as if the word didn't come easy. Wesley nodded once, his expression unreadable. Behind them, the sun finally sank below the ridge, and the first cool breath of night swept across the desert. silent witnesses to two strangers, bound by chance, standing at the edge of something neither yet understood. By the time they reached Wesley's ranch, the desert sky had turned deep indigo, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound. The trail wound between low hills, and the only light came from a single lamp glowing in the window of a weathered cabin. The place stood quiet against the wind. Not grand, not new, but solid, like the man who built it. Kaya limped beside him, wrapped in his coat, the sleeves hanging past her hands. The smell of worn leather and dust clung to the fabric. Every few steps, she glanced sideways, watching him from under dark lashes, unsure whether to fear or trust him. The corral fence creaked as they passed. Two horses lifted their heads from the trough, nostrils flaring, sensing strangers. Wesley patted one on the neck, murmuring, "Easy now, Willow. It's just me." He pushed open the cabin door. The hinges groaned like an old man waking from a nap. "Ain't much," he said, stepping aside so she could enter first. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and saddle soap. A wood stove sat in the corner, its iron belly radiating a low heat. The walls were lined with shelves holding tin cups, an old rifle, a Bible with a cracked spine, and a framed photograph coated in dust. A woman and two small children squinting into the sun. Kaya's gaze lingered there for a moment. "Your family?" she asked quietly. Wesley didn't look at the picture. "Was," he said simply, and began stacking kindling. She said nothing more. The fire popped, throwing amber light across the room. It danced over the worn boards, the empty rocking chair, the coat rack that held only dust. He filled a pot with beans and strips of salted pork, set it over the stove, and sliced a chunk of cornbread in half. "Ain't fancy," he said, "but it'll fill you." When she didn't answer, he looked over. Kaya stood near the window, arms crossed inside his coat. "You can wash up round back," he added. "Rain barrel's full. Water will be cold but cleaner than the creek." For a moment she hesitated, as though waiting for a trap. Then she nodded and slipped outside. Through the open door, Wesley could hear the soft splash of water, the rattle of tin, and the quiet hum of crickets. He busied himself with the meal. Anything to keep from thinking. Anything to keep from remembering. When she came back in, her wet hair hung in dark ropes down her back. She looked smaller somehow, but steadier. She sat across from him at the table. He passed her a tin plate. They ate in silence for a while, broken only by the scrape of spoons. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls like a restless spirit. Finally, Kaya spoke. "You live here alone?" "Long enough to get used to it," he said. "Why help me?" He looked up from his plate, his eyes unreadable under the lamplight. "Because I've seen what men like them do when nobody's watching," he said, "and I've done enough watching in my life." She studied him as if trying to read the truth in his face. After a long pause, she said, "You sound like a man carrying ghosts." He gave a tired half smile. "Maybe. Ghosts make good company out here." Kaya's lips pressed into a thin line. "In my tribe, we say ghosts don't come unless they're called." "Then I must have been calling a long time," he murmured, setting his plate aside. The stove crackled, throwing soft light between them. For the first time since the sun had set, the desert chill began to ease. Wesley leaned back, rubbed the back of his neck, and said quietly, "Used to trade horses to the army, back when I thought there was money and meaning in it. Turns out there was neither." He paused, the firelight catching the tired lines on his face. "Now I just keep cattle, work the land, try to forget what I helped build." Kaya's eyes lifted, curious but cautious. "You try to forget," she said softly, "but the land remembers." Wesley looked toward the window. The stars had come out, sharp and cold, the way they always did after a hard day. "Yeah," he said, "it surely does." For a long while, neither of them spoke. Two souls adrift in the same vast silence, bound by loss and something unnamed. A fragile peace that hung in the warm glow of the stove, as the desert outside breathed and waited. Rain came soft and steady that night, a rare blessing in Arizona. It drummed lightly on the cabin roof, rolling down the warped shingles in slow silver trails. Inside, the fire had burned low, throwing a sleepy orange glow that pulsed with the wind, sneaking through the cracks in the walls. Kaya slept on the cot by the stove, curled up in Wesley's old coat. The rain's rhythm seemed to soothe her. For once, her breath came easy, no longer ragged from running. Wesley sat at the table, turning his empty coffee cup between his hands, lost somewhere far behind the years. He should have felt peace. Instead, the quiet pressed on him like a weight. Memories had a way of clawing their way back up through the dark when the night got too still. He rose, meaning to throw another log on the fire, when something slipped from the coat draped over Kaya's shoulder and hit the floor with a dull thud. Wesley frowned and crouched down. It was a small square of tanned leather, edges cracked with age, darkened by time and sweat. He picked it up, holding it near the firelight, and his heart stopped cold. 2 names had been carved into the hide, deep and deliberate: Harlan Morgan, and beneath it, Wesley Reed. For a long moment, all he could do was stare. The rain outside grew heavier, as though the desert itself held its breath. He turned the piece over, half expecting a trick of light or imagination. But the letters were real, burned into the leather with a branding iron. Before he could think of what it meant, Kaya stirred. Her eyes opened, sharp and aware, as if she hadn't really been asleep at all. "Put it down," she said. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air like a knife. Wesley froze. He looked at her, at the woman who had stumbled into his life less than a day ago, and saw that calm vanish into anger. She pushed herself upright, the coat slipping from her shoulders. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Her gaze hardened. "From the ruins of my village." She took a step forward and snatched the leather from his hands. "You recognize it, don't you?" Wesley hesitated. The fire popped behind him. "I recognize the names," he admitted. Kaya's expression turned to ice. "You should. One of them belongs to the man who burned my home. The other—" She lifted the leather so the light hit it. "To the man who sold him the horses and the bullets to do it." Her words hit harder than any bullet ever could. Wesley felt them land in his chest, hot and sharp. "I didn't know what Morgan planned," he said, the words low, almost to himself. "He came through here years back, paid cash, good coin for mounts and supplies. Said it was for patrol work, keeping order. I didn't ask questions." Kai let out a short, bitter laugh. "And because you didn't ask, my people died." Wesley couldn't look at her. His jaw tightened. "You think I sleep easy? You think I don't see their faces when I close my eyes?" He set a hand on the table to steady himself. "That trade fed my wife and kids for a winter. Then the soldiers came back through. Same horses, same guns. I knew right then what I'd done." Her eyes flickered, something between fury and disbelief. "You expect me to forgive that?" "No," he said simply. "I don't expect anything." The storm outside built to a steady roar. Thunder rolled over the plains. Inside the cabin, the silence between them stretched taut, heavy with things that couldn't be unsaid. Kaya stood still, clutching the leather to her chest. Her voice softened just enough to tremble. "That piece belonged to my sister's husband. He carved those names with his dying breath, so we'd never forget who killed us." Wesley looked up then, rain glinting against the window behind her like falling glass. "Then don't forget," he said. "But don't pretend I can't bleed for it too." For a moment, her eyes searched his, not for mercy, but for truth. And what she found there stopped her from striking him, from screaming the pain that burned in her throat. "I didn't know," he whispered more to himself than to her. "But I've still got blood on my hands." Kaya turned away, the firelight catching the wetness in her eyes. "You can't wash that off," she said. Wesley nodded once, slow and tired. "I know." Outside, lightning split the sky, a clean white wound over the desert. Inside, 2 people stood on opposite sides of a dying fire, their pasts carved into the same piece of leather, both branded by choices they could never take back. Morning crept slow over the desert, spilling gold light through the cracks of Wesley's cabin. Dust floated in the beams like ghosts made visible. The rain had passed, leaving the world washed clean, or at least pretending to be. Kaya was already awake, sitting at the edge of the cot, tightening the leather straps around her bare feet. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but her eyes were fierce again, like embers that refused to die. "I'll be leaving," she said flatly as Wesley poured coffee into a tin cup. He didn't look up. Not on those feet, you won't. I've walked worse, she muttered. Not through 40 miles of desert, he said, handing her the cup. Fort Apache's a long way, and Rattler Morgan's still out there looking to finish what he started. Her jaw clenched at the name. She accepted the coffee but didn't drink. You think I'm scared of him? No, Wesley said quietly. But I think you're hurt, and hurt people don't last long out there. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the ticking of the stove and the call of a lone hawk circling above the valley. Wesley studied her for a moment, the set of her shoulders, the stubborn line of her mouth. He'd seen that kind of fire before. It burned hot, right up until it burned out. He took his hat from the hook by the door. Come on, he said. I've got something that'll help. Outside, the air smelled of wet clay and sunlight. The corral shimmered with the afterglow of rain, and the horses shifted restlessly, hooves sinking in the damp earth. Wesley led Kaya to the barn, an old red structure leaning against the wind, but still standing proud. Inside, the smell of hay and horse sweat filled the air. Wesley's hand brushed along the flanks of a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. The animal flicked her ears back, calm and curious. This here's Willow, he said. Strong, steady, doesn't spook easy. She'll take you as far as you need to go. Kaya hesitated at the stall door. Her people had always respected horses, creatures that listened better than most men. She reached out a tentative hand. Willow sniffed her fingers, then nudged her palm gently, accepting her. She's beautiful, Kaya murmured. Wesley nodded. Came to me half wild. Guess we've got that in common. He saddled the mare, moving with the easy rhythm of habit. The scrape of leather, the pull of cinched straps, the quiet creak of wood. Kaya watched him in silence, noting the care in every motion. When he handed her the reins, she swung into the saddle with surprising grace for someone still half limping. The morning sun caught the edge of her dark hair, turning it copper for an instant. Wesley stepped back, resting his hand on the fence. You can head east through Dry Gulch, follow the riverbed, but without water, without shade, you won't make it far. She tightened her grip on the reins. Then I'll make it as far as I can. He looked up at her, stubborn, proud, maybe even foolish, but alive. Fort Apache's a hell of a place to go looking for salvation, he said, but if you're set on it, you're gonna need someone who knows the land. Her eyes narrowed. Someone like you? He gave a half smile. Someone exactly like me. Kaya's mouth twitched, somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. You think I trust you? No, he said, meeting her gaze. But I think you trust that I don't want to see another person die because of me. That gave her pause. The wind swept through the open barn doors, carrying the smell of sage and rain. Finally, she said, I don't trust men, Wesley Reed. He tipped his hat slightly. Can't argue with that. But, she added, her tone softening just enough to surprise him. I trust the road. And if you know it better than I do, she looked toward the endless stretch of desert. Then right ahead, I'll follow. Wesley nodded once, a quiet acceptance. He walked to his own horse, a gray gelding named Scout, and swung into the saddle. Stay close, he said. Desert's got a mean sense of humor. Kaya clicked her tongue, and Willow moved forward beside him. The two riders crossed through the open gate and into the red dust that shimmered under the morning sun. Behind them, the cabin stood silent, smoke curling from its chimney like a memory fading into the sky. Ahead lay 40 miles of harsh country, and a reckoning neither of them could yet name. The sun was merciless by noon, hanging high and white over the Arizona desert. Heat shimmered off the ground like the air itself was trying to escape. Every breath tasted of dust and salt. The horses moved slow, their hooves sinking into the red-gold sand that stretched for miles in every direction. Wesley rode ahead, hat pulled low, sweat glistening on his neck. Kaya followed a few paces behind, her dark hair clinging to her temples, her shoulders straight despite the ache in her body. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the ranch that morning. Out here, words seemed to dry up before they could reach the air. The only sound was the steady creak of leather, the rhythmic clop of hooves, and the whisper of the wind carrying the smell of sagebrush in distant rain that would never come. Finally, Wesley broke the silence. Used to be a settlement out here, he said, pointing to a patch of land where the sand looked darker. Scorched. Back when folks thought they could tame this place. Kaya looked where he pointed. What happened? He shrugged, eyes still on the horizon. Same thing that happens to everything in the desert. Time, drought, disease. He paused, his voice roughening just slightly. My wife and boys caught fever one winter. I buried them behind the house. Kaya's gaze softened, though her expression didn't change much. You stayed? He gave a faint, humorless chuckle. For a while, I thought about leaving. Thought maybe I'd find something better somewhere else. But the truth is, I didn't know how to live anywhere that didn't hurt. She was quiet after that. Sometimes silence said more than pity ever could. They rode on until the ground began to dip and the air grew cooler. Ahead, a few palms broke the endless monotony. An oasis, small but real, a wound of green in a body of gold. Kaya dismounted first, wobbling slightly as her sore legs touched the ground. Wesley followed, tying the horses to a mesquite tree. He scooped water from the spring with his hat and handed it to her. Don't drink too fast, he warned. Desert'll trick you into thinking you're fine, then drop you dead before sunset. She nodded, taking careful sips. Then she knelt beside the water, rinsing the dried blood from her feet. The water turned pink for a moment before the sand swallowed it. Wesley knelt beside her, pulling a small tin of salve from his saddlebag. Hold still, he said gruffly. She hesitated, then let him lift her foot gently. His hands were rough but careful, the kind of touch that came from years of handling horses, not people. He wrapped her foot in a strip of linen torn from his old shirt. When he finished, she said quietly, You've lost much. He nodded, tying off the bandage. Seems like this land takes a little from everyone who lives on it. Some just don't notice till it's too late. Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time since they met, there wasn't anger there, only understanding. They sat by the spring for a while, neither speaking, listening to the soft trickle of water and the far-off cry of a hawk. The air shimmered, and for a brief moment, it felt almost peaceful. Then Wesley's head jerked up. He'd caught something faint, a vibration through the sand, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the earth. Get down, he said sharply. Kaya froze. What is it? He held up a hand, listening. Then they both heard it, the unmistakable thunder of hooves rolling through the desert. Riders, Wesley muttered, his face hardening. 3, maybe 4. Kaya's eyes darkened. Rattler Morgan. Wesley's rifle was in his hands before she finished the name. He scanned the ridge to the west, where dust plumes curled against the sky. Looks like the bastard couldn't take a hint, he said. Kaya stood, her hand instinctively resting near the knife at her hip. He'll keep coming. Yeah, Wesley said, checking the chamber of his Winchester. But this time, he's riding into my kind of country. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of laughter, mean and eager, across the open plain. Kaya glanced at Wesley. He looked older now, carved from sun and regret, but his eyes were alive, sharp as flint. The fragile piece of the oasis was gone. The red dust had found them again. And somewhere between fear and fury, 2 lost souls readied themselves for a fight neither of them had asked for. But both knew was coming. The wind began to rise before noon, rolling across the flats in long, restless gusts that kicked up ribbons of dust. The heat bent the horizon, turning everything distant into a wavering mirage. Wesley knew that kind of wind, the kind that carried trouble with it. They had stopped near a stretch of rocky outcroppings, the kind of place a man could get ambushed or do the ambushing himself. Kaya watered the horses, her dark braids sticking to the sweat on her back. Wesley stood a few yards off, scanning the rim of the canyon with narrowed eyes. That was when he heard it, faint but unmistakable, the pounding rhythm of hooves. Mount up, he said quietly. Kaya froze mid-motion. Rattler? Maybe, Wesley answered, already chambering around in his Winchester. Maybe worse. The next moment shattered in gunfire. A bullet struck the rock beside them, sending a spray of stone chips into the air. Kaya dropped instinctively, rolling behind a boulder. Wesley spun, firing a quick shot toward the ridge. 3 riders burst into view, their coats snapping like flags in the wind. Rattler Morgan led them, his grin wide and mean beneath the brim of a dust-stained hat. My pa's gonna be real glad to see you again, Reed, he shouted, his voice swallowed by the gusts. Another shot rang out, echoing through the canyon. Wesley ducked, his hat flying off as the bullet whined past. He slid beside Kai, who clutched her small revolver with both hands. "Keep your head low," he barked, reloading fast. "I'm not hiding," she snapped. "This ain't about pride," he said. "It's about staying alive." Kaya's reply was drowned out by the next volley. The air filled with the sharp smell of gunpowder, the wind carrying it across the sand. Wesley leaned around the rock, fired once, twice, one bullet catching the rifle of the man on the left, sending it spinning from his grip. The others ducked behind their horses, shouting. Then a cry of pain split the noise. Kaya jerked back, her hand flying to her arm where a bullet had grazed her. Blood soaked the edge of her sleeve. Wesley caught her before she fell. "Easy," he muttered, pulling her behind cover. He tore a strip of cloth from his shirt and wrapped it around her arm, tight enough to stop the bleeding. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't make a sound. "Don't stop fighting," she hissed. "Wasn't planning to." He peeked around the boulder again. Rattler was circling wide now, trying to flank them. Wesley drew a slow breath, took aim, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The shot hit Rattler's gun square in the barrel, splintering the grip. The weapon flew from his hand, clattering into the sand. Rattler's horse reared, nearly throwing him. "You son of a—" Rattler roared, clutching his bleeding wrist. He pulled back hard on the reins, fury twisting his face. The other two hesitated, suddenly less sure of themselves. "Call it off!" one of them yelled. Rattler glared at the ridge, his eyes full of hate and something else. Respect, maybe, or the faint edge of fear. Then he spat into the dust. "This ain't over, Reed," he shouted. "My old man's on his way. Next time it won't be just three of us." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, the others following, kicking up a storm of red dirt that blurred into the distance. Wesley waited until the echoes of hooves faded before lowering his rifle. The world grew quiet again. Too quiet. Only the hiss of the wind remained, brushing over the sand like a whisper of unfinished business. Kaya pressed a hand to her arm, breathing hard. "He'll come back," she said. Wesley nodded. "He will, and he won't come alone." She studied him for a moment, then said softly, "Why help me now when you know what's coming?" He looked out over the desert, the sun painting everything in shades of copper and fire. "Because once you've run from your past long enough," he said, "you stop being scared of the men chasing you and start being scared of the man you've become." Kaya followed his gaze to the empty horizon, where the dust still hung in the air like smoke. Somewhere out there, vengeance was gathering, and the desert, ever patient, waited for blood again. By the time the sun began to dip, the desert had softened from gold to rust. Wesley led Kaya through a narrow passage between two cliffs, the horses stepping carefully on loose stone. Wind echoed faintly through the rocks, whispering like ghosts of old stories. "This way," he said. The path opened suddenly into a small canyon, a secret hollow where green grass still clung to the earth, nourished by a thin stream trickling from the rocks above. Cottonwoods grew crooked along the waterline, their leaves trembling silver in the breeze. The air here was cooler, carrying the scent of pine and wet stone. Kaya stopped, staring at the little valley in disbelief. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Not many know it's here," Wesley replied, dismounting. "Used to bring my wife and boys up here in the summer. We'd camp by that ridge." He pointed toward a flat stretch shaded by boulders. "They like to watch the stars come up." There was something in his voice, soft, like a man talking to the past instead of the living. Kaya said nothing. She only tied Willow to a branch and knelt by the stream, splashing cool water onto her face. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was gentle, like the hush that settles over the land after a storm. Wesley sat down on a rock nearby, his hand pressed to the side of his ribs where the recoil of the rifle earlier had left a deep bruise. Kaya noticed, frowning. "You're hurt," she said. He shrugged. "Takes more than a fight to break me." Still, she rose, moving toward a patch of low brush that grew along the canyon wall. She crouched, collecting leaves and stems with quick, practiced hands. "Yucca root," she explained, crushing some between two stones. "Good for bruises. My grandmother used to make us chew it when we got hurt playing near the fire." Wesley gave a faint grin. "Sounds worse than the pain." She didn't smile back, but her tone softened. Maybe pain has to taste bad to teach us something. He didn't argue. He watched her dip the mixture into a cloth and press it gently against his side. The cool sting made him flinch. "Hold still," she said, her eyes intent on the wound. For a long moment, there was no sound but the trickle of water and the quiet hum of insects waking in the grass. Then Wesley spoke, his voice low. "You were right, back at the cabin, about the horses. I supplied the Morgans." Kaya froze mid-motion, her hands still resting against his ribs. "They came to me with orders from the fort," he went on. "Said they needed mounts for patrol. Sturdy ones, good on rough ground. I sold them 2 dozen. Didn't think much of it." He stared at the fading light beyond the canyon rim. Next month, word came through. An Apache village burned to the ground. I saw the brands on the horses when they brought them back to trade. My brands. Kaya's voice was quiet but sharp as flint. "My people's blood bought your new roof." He swallowed hard. "I don't deny it. Every night since I hear them. The screams, the gunfire. I keep telling myself I didn't know. But it doesn't make the nights any quieter." For a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. Then Kaya drew her hand back, wringing out the cloth. "You can't change that night," she said softly. "No man can." She turned to face him fully, her eyes deep and tired. "But you're riding with me today. That must mean something." "Sama." Wesley met her gaze. The regret in his eyes matched only by the smallest spark of relief, as if her words had given him permission to keep moving, even if forgiveness never came. "Maybe," he said after a while, "maybe the good Lord ain't done with us yet." Kaya glanced toward the fading sun. "Maybe he's watching to see what we do next." The canyon fell into silence again, the sky bleeding purple over the cliffs. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its cry long and lonely. Wesley leaned back against the rock, the pain in his side easing under her herbs, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. The desert beyond the canyon could wait. Tonight there was peace, fragile, fleeting, but real, and in that quiet, the ghost stayed still. Night came hard and cold in the canyon. The wind hissed through the narrow walls, carrying with it the scent of pine and smoke. A small fire crackled between Wesley and Kaya, its orange light dancing across the rock faces and throwing long, twitching shadows behind them. The horses grazed quietly in the grass below. Overhead, the stars burned sharp as nails in the black sky. Too bright, too close. It was the kind of night where a man's thoughts had nowhere to hide. Wesley sat with his back against a boulder, whittling at a piece of cedar just to keep his hands busy. Kaya sat across the fire, her knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the flames. Between them, the silence was thick. Not angry, not peaceful, just heavy with things unspoken. After a long while, Wesley tossed the wood aside. "There's something you ought to know," he said, his voice gravel low. Kaya didn't move, but her gaze shifted toward him. "I heard talk in the last town I passed through," he continued. "Colonel Harlan Morgan's back in Arizona territory. They say he's got men mustering near Fort Apache again. Soldiers and hired guns alike." The name struck like a match in the dark. Kaya's hands clenched slowly in her lap. "Morgan," she said, the word tasting like poison. "Ain't just a rumor," Wesley went on. "He's bringing a full detachment. Claims he's hunting outlaws, but we both know what that means." Kaya reached for the small leather pouch at her side, the one she carried everywhere since the night at the cabin. She untied the strap and drew out the square of tanned hide, its surface worn and dark. The 2 names still burned deep into it. "Harlan Morgan," she whispered, tracing the letters with her thumb. Then her eyes lifted, catching his across the fire. "And Wesley Reed." He didn't flinch. He'd had that reckoning coming for a long time. "2 debts," she said softly. "One I understand. His, the other." Her fingers tightened around the leather. "I'll decide when the time's right." The wind pushed hard against the canyon walls, sending sparks swirling upward into the night. Wesley's face was lit half by firelight, half by shadow, like a man split between guilt and redemption. "I won't stop you from going after him," he said finally. "Hell, I might even hand you the bullets myself. But Morgan's got men, and he's got rank. He ain't just some outlaw riding alone." Kaya stared at the fire, her jaw set. He took my family, my home, my tribe. He thinks he took my spirit too. She looked up, eyes glinting hard. But he never did. For a while, the fire was the only thing that spoke. The flames popped, the wind moaned, and far off a coyote cried. A lonely sound that somehow fit the both of them. Wesley rubbed a hand over his beard. I could ride the other way, he said. Pretend this don't concern me. But it does. It always did. Kaya watched him in silence, her expression unreadable. He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. If you're going after Morgan, I'm riding with you. Maybe it's not forgiveness I'm looking for. Maybe just a chance to do something right for once. Kaya tilted her head, studying him. You think you can buy back your soul? He gave a small, tired smile. Maybe not, but I can sure as hell make him remember the faces he buried. The words hung in the air, quiet but sharp. Finally, Kaya nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then we ride together, she said. But understand this, Wesley Reed. I ride for justice, not mercy. Wouldn't expect any different, he replied. The fire burned lower, and the wind eased for a moment, as if the desert itself was listening. Kaya tucked the leather square back into her pouch, close to her heart. Above them, the stars shifted behind a thin veil of cloud, and the canyon fell into shadow. Tomorrow they would leave this hidden refuge and step back into the wide, unforgiving world. As Wesley fed the last branch into the coals, he spoke softly, more to himself than to her. Ghosts got a way of coming back around, he said, but maybe this time we'll be the ones doing the haunting. Kaya didn't answer. She just stared into the flames, her face half lit and fierce, like a spirit born of fire and dust. And somewhere out there, beneath the same stars, Colonel Harlan Morgan was moving closer. The ghost of every sin Wesley had ever tried to bury, riding back into his life with the sound of thunder on his heels. Dawn bled slowly over the plains, pale light spilling across the sagebrush and turning the land the color of old bone. Fort Apache lay ahead, a cluster of tents and timber barracks rising from the dust like a wound that never healed. Wesley and Kaya rode in silence, the chill of morning cutting through their coats. They had slept little. The fire from the night before had burned down to embers, but the plan they forged beside it burned hotter still. By mid-morning, they had abandoned their horses a mile out and approached on foot. Wesley pulled a weathered cavalry coat from his saddlebag and shrugged it on. We passed for scouts long enough to get inside, he said. Kaya wrapped a faded shawl around her head and shoulders, shadowing her features. And once we're in, find his tent, he replied. Morgan keeps records. He always did. If we can prove what he's planning, maybe we stop it before it starts. The camp was already stirring when they slipped in. Soldiers carrying buckets, smoke rising from cook fires, the clang of metal echoing off the barracks. Nobody looked too close. The dust made every face the same. They moved through the maze of tents until they reached the command quarters, a large canvas pavilion flying the U.S. flag. Wesley glanced around, then ducked inside. Inside the tent, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of sweat and oil. Papers covered the desk. Kaya's eyes darted over the maps pinned to the wall. Red lines marking tribal lands, blue pins tracing patrol routes. Wesley froze when he saw one page lying open. Operation Cinder Path. Orders stamped with the seal of Colonel Harlan Morgan. Beneath it, in bold print, simulated Apache uprising to justify full pacification order. His jaw tightened. Son of a bitch, he muttered. Kaya stepped beside him, reading the words, her breath catching. He's going to kill them. Again. Not if we stop him. Wesley began stuffing the papers into his coat. Just then, a voice sliced through the quiet. You always did have a bad habit of reading other men's mail, Reed. They turned. Colonel Harlan Morgan stood in the entrance. Older, broader around the middle, but the eyes were the same cold gray Wesley remembered. A pistol hung easy in his hand, more like an accessory than a weapon. Colonel, Wesley said evenly, didn't expect to see you still breathing God's air. Morgan smiled thinly. You could have joined me, Reed. Instead, you went soft. And now you crawl back with a squaw at your side? His gaze slid to Kaya, cruel amusement flickering there. Tell me, she worth dying for? Kaya didn't flinch. You talk too much for a man who hides behind soldiers. Morgan laughed, low and sharp. The savages taught you spirit. Shame they couldn't teach you when to keep your mouth shut. He turned his eyes back to Wesley. You've betrayed me once before. Now you do it again. For a woman who should have died with the rest of her tribe? Wesley's voice was calm, but his hand was steady on the rifle strap. No, Colonel. I'm doing this because my conscience still breathes. And yours should have died years ago. For a second, the two men stared across the narrow tent, one forged by power, the other by guilt. Then the wind outside kicked up, snapping the canvas walls like a drumbeat. Morgan's finger twitched on the trigger, but Kaya moved first, swinging the lantern from the desk straight into his arm. The pistol fired wild, shattering a lantern hook above. Flames leapt up, licking at the fabric. Go! Wesley barked. He shoved Kaya toward the back of the tent as smoke thickened, grabbing the papers from the desk before the fire consumed them. Morgan roared, swinging his arm to strike Wesley, but the younger man caught him square in the jaw with the butt of his rifle. The colonel went down hard, blood on his teeth. Outside, chaos erupted, soldiers shouting, fire spreading fast. Kaya grabbed Wesley's sleeve, hauling him through a gap in the tent wall. They stumbled into the sunlight, choking on smoke. The papers clutched tight between them. From behind them came Morgan's bellow, furious and guttural. You can't run from justice, Reed. Wesley turned once, his face grim against the blaze. Justice don't run, he said. It rides. Then they vanished into the rising wind, leaving behind a camp drowning in its own lies, and a colonel who had just watched his ghost come back to life. The first light of morning crept across the desert like a slow-moving tide, painting the world in shades of copper and red. Smoke still curled above Fort Apache, thick and bitter, carrying the smell of gunpowder and burned wood. The ground trembled with the dying echoes of gunfire. Wesley and Kaya had made it as far as the stables, the last battleground between order and chaos. Horses screamed and kicked in their stalls, their eyes rolling white in terror. The air was alive with dust and the sharp crack of rifles. Colonel Morgan's voice bellowed above the din, commanding his men to fire, to finish it. But in the confusion, smoke, fear, the chaos of men too long trained to obey, one soldier's shot went wide. It struck the colonel clean through the chest. He fell hard against the corral fence, shock freezing on his face. For the first time, the great Harlan Morgan looked human and terrified. His hand reached for Wesley, for mercy that would never come. Then he slumped forward, the dust rising to swallow him. Wesley didn't watch him die. There wasn't time. Kaya, he shouted, voice hoarse. We have to move. She emerged from the smoke, clutching two small Apache children, their faces streaked with soot and tears. They had been locked inside one of the supply sheds, the last survivors of Morgan's relocation. Wesley's breath caught when he saw them. Maybe that was the real reason she'd come here. Not revenge, but rescue. A bullet tore past, grazing Wesley's shoulder. He stumbled, firing back. Go! He yelled, waving her toward the open gate. Get them out! But Kaya hesitated. You're bleeding! Don't argue, he growled, pressing a hand to his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, dark and steady. I can still ride. They reached the horses, Willow and Scout, trembling but alive. Kaya lifted one child up, then the other. Wesley helped her mount, his breath ragged. His vision swam with heat and light, but his voice stayed steady. You ride east, he said, gripping her arm. Don't stop till you hit the ridge. The river will take you to the canyon. Kaya shook her head, tears burning through the soot on her face. Come with us. He smiled faintly, tired, gentle. Ain't much left of me to bring. Don't you say that. But his knees buckled, and he sank to one side, catching himself against the post. Kaya jumped down, trying to hold him up. Wesley! He reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me, Kaya. You live. You get them out of here. You keep riding till this land forgets our names. She shook her head, crying now. You saved me. You don't get to quit. He smiled again, faint and broken. Ain't quittin'. Just done fightin' ghosts. The wind picked up, swirling the dust and ash around them. Somewhere, a horse screamed and broke free, galloping into the sunrise. Wesley's hand found hers one last time. "Live," he whispered. "Take them far from this place. And remember, not every man deserves to die." Then his hand went still. Kaya sat there for a long moment, the world silent except for the distant crackle of fire and the whisper of the desert wind. The sun crested the horizon, blazing red through the smoke. She rose, her face set with a quiet strength. The children watched her, wide-eyed, trusting. Gently, she pulled from her satchel the piece of tanned leather, the one with the two names carved deep into it. She knelt beside the dying fire of the fort's wreckage and held it over the flames. The leather curled, blackened, and then split. The name Harlan Morgan burned away to ash. The other, Reed, remained, half-charred but legible. Kaya tied it to Willow's bridle. "You'll ride with us," she whispered. As the sun rose higher, she turned the mare toward the east. The land stretched before them, endless and wild, a place built for both sorrow and rebirth. Behind her, Fort Apache smoldered, a monument to all that had died there. Greed, vengeance, and maybe in some small way, guilt. Ahead, the wind blew clean, warm, and new. Kaya didn't look back again. She rode into the morning light, the two children pressed close, the desert carrying them forward. And somewhere in that boundless silence, the spirit of Wesley Reed rode with them,